There's a diner somewhere in your memory. Maybe you've never been able to name it. Maybe you've never even tried. But if you close your eyes right now and go back, really go back, you can almost smell it. Bacon grease on a cast iron flat top ... The faint burnt edge of toast that sat just a second too long under the broiler. Coffee so black and so strong it felt like it was doing you a favor just by existing. And somewhere in the background, Frank Sinatra drifting out of a little jukebox in the corner, fighting for space against the clatter of silverware and the easy laughter of people who knew each other's names. That diner is gone now. Most of them are. Replaced by drive-thrus and chain restaurants where nobody knows your name and the eggs come pre-scrambled out of a carton. But what's been lost isn't just the buildings, isn't just the Formica counters or the spinning stools or the little handwritten menu cards in the window. What's been lost is a whole breakfast culture, an entire language of morning food that Americans once spoke fluently every single day and have now almost entirely forgotten. Today, we're going back. 25 forgotten diner breakfasts from the 1960s, dishes that were ordered 1,000 times a day across this country and have since slipped into a kind of culinary silence. Some of them will make you want to get up and cook right now. Some of them will stop you cold because you'll realize you haven't thought about this particular thing in 50 years. And a few of them, I promise you this, are going to make you reach for the comments section and type something about somebody you loved. So pull up a stool. The coffee's hot. Let's go back. Number 25 on our list is the dish that was almost too ordinary to remember, which is exactly why it's been forgotten. The pork chop breakfast. Not the delicate little breakfast chop you might occasionally find in a specialty restaurant today. This was a full, thick, bone-in pork chop, pan-fried in a cast-iron skillet with nothing more than salt, black pepper, and a little lard, served alongside 2 eggs any style and a wedge of white toast that came already buttered, whether you asked for it that way or not. In the early 60s, diners across the American heartland, from roadside spots in Ohio to little family places in Missouri, served this plate for breakfast without a second thought. It was farmer's food, working man's food, food that said, you've got a hard day ahead of you and this kitchen is going to make sure you're ready for it. A plate like this cost about $1.15 at places like Mel's Family Kitchen or the Sunrise Diner on Route 30. The pork chop would arrive with a slight char on the bone and that unmistakable sizzle still audible as the plate hit the Formica counter. You ate it with a knife and held the bone at the end because nobody was watching and it was better that way. You don't see this anymore. Pork chops for breakfast became something people vaguely associated with their grandparents, then with the past, then with nothing at all. And somewhere in that fading is a small and unacknowledged loss. Coming in at number 24 is something that a lot of veterans would remember better than civilians, though it wasn't exclusive to military mess halls by any stretch. Creamed chipped beef on toast, affectionately and not so affectionately known by a nickname that we'll keep polite for this video. Thin-shaved dried beef, almost translucent and deeply salty, folded into a thick white cream sauce, poured over 2 slices of white toast until the bread went soft and the whole thing steamed gently in the morning air. By the 1960s, this was a staple of diner breakfast menus from coast to coast. Some places added a sprinkle of paprika on top at die. Some added black pepper that bit back. It cost about 65 cents at most places, sometimes less. The milkman had already made his delivery, the kids were at school, and a working man could sit down to a plate of SOS and a cup of coffee before heading out and feel like the day had a proper beginning. The dish wasn't fancy. It wasn't meant to be. It was pure, uncomplicated comfort, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you in return. And when it disappeared from menus sometime in the 1970s, it took that particular feeling with it. Number 23 is one that rural diners kept alive long after city spots had already moved on. Griddled cornmeal mush. If you grew up in the South or the rural Midwest, you know exactly what this is and you already have a feeling somewhere in your chest right now. Cornmeal cooked low and slow into a thick porridge, then poured into a loaf pan, cooled overnight in the diner's back refrigerator, sliced into half-inch rounds in the morning, and fried on the flat top in butter until the outside went gold, and a little crisp while the inside stayed warm and yielding. Served with maple syrup or molasses, sometimes with a rasher of bacon on the side. It was the kind of breakfast that smelled like a grandmother's kitchen, even when it was being made by a short-order cook named Earl, who had a cigarette behind his ear and hadn't slept more than 5 hours. A diner in rural Kentucky or Tennessee might have had a sign in the window, "Mush today." And people came for it specifically. If you ever had it, if somebody in your family made this on a Tuesday morning and called it nothing special, leave a comment below. Because this is one that I genuinely believe a whole generation has quietly mourned without ever knowing what they were mourning. At number 26, we find a breakfast that occupied a very specific place in the American morning. The kind of thing that was ordered not because it was indulgent, but because it was considered genuinely healthy. A bowl of hot oatmeal or cream of wheat, and alongside it, a small glass dish of stewed prunes. The prunes, wrinkled, dark, swimming in their own thick syrup, were not a garnish. They were practically a prescription. Diners kept them in big ceramic crocks in the back and spooned them into small glass dishes before every shift. Older regulars ordered this combination like clockwork. The waitress didn't even ask. She just brought it. You'd see it at a place like Dorothy's Coffee Shop on Main Street, the kind of spot that had the same 12 customers at the same stools every morning before 7, and the clock on the wall hadn't been moved in 11 years. The hot cereal would steam gently, the prunes would glisten, and the whole thing was washed down with coffee that was already waiting before you sat down. It sounds unremarkable. It was. And that's exactly why it felt like home. Because home, real home, is mostly made of unremarkable things done the same way every morning until one morning they stop. Number 21 was not for the faint of heart, even in the 1960s, though that's hard to imagine now. Liver and onions for breakfast. Calf's liver, sliced thin, dusted lightly in flour, and hit fast on a screaming hot flat top with a pile of sweet onions already going in butter on the side. The liver went maybe 2 minutes aside, any more and it turned to leather. The whole plate would be brought out with eggs, sometimes a side of toast and a cup of that thick diner coffee. This was, in certain corners of the country, a completely ordinary breakfast order. Doctors recommended liver regularly in those years. It was iron-rich, economical, and a diner could buy it cheap from the same butcher who delivered 3 times a week. Regulars who ordered it weren't considered strange. They were considered practical. The smell alone, that iron and onion smell rising off a hot grill at 6:30 in the morning, was enough to either make you walk in the door or keep on walking. But for those who loved it, there was nothing else like it in the world. And nobody, not a single diner in this country that I know of, makes it for breakfast anymore. We reach number 20, and here we find a breakfast so humble, so working class in its origins, that it almost feels like an act of honesty to put it on this list. Fried bologna and eggs. A thick, round slice of bologna, the cheap, pink, mass-produced kind that came off the roll at the butcher counter, hit hard on a dry griddle until it puffed up in the center and went dark around the edges and curled just slightly. Alongside it, 2 eggs sunny side up with the whites just set and the yolks bright orange the way yolks used to be when they came from actual farm eggs or from the man on your block who kept chickens in his yard. The bologna was barely 50 cents at the grocery store. A diner could put this plate together for almost nothing and still charge 60 cents and make everyone happy. Kids loved it. Truck drivers loved it. Old men who'd been coming to the same stool since Eisenhower was in office loved it. There's something disarmingly honest about fried bologna. It makes no pretensions. It doesn't try to be anything other than exactly what it is. And somehow that quality, that refusal to apologize for itself, is part of what's been lost, not just in food, but in the world that served it. Coming in at number 19, and this one is going to stop some of you completely. The buckwheat pancake. Not regular pancakes with a little buckwheat flour mixed in. Real buckwheat pancakes, made from a batter that was almost gray in color, slightly sour because proper buckwheat batter was fermented overnight and dense in a way that wheat pancakes simply never are. These weren't fluffy. They weren't beautiful in the way anyone would photograph them today. They were dark and a little earthy, and they held butter the way no other pancake in the world does, the butter going down through the surface almost immediately, soaking into the cake in a way that felt generous, felt right. A diner that made proper buckwheat cakes would often start the batter the night before, and there would be a note on the chalkboard in the morning: buckwheat cakes today only. Because once the batter was gone, it was gone. They came with a pitcher of maple syrup warmed on the flat top, and they were the kind of breakfast that required silence, not because the atmosphere demanded it, but because you simply didn't want to talk. You just wanted to eat. If your father or grandfather used to make these on a Sunday morning, I need you to say that in the comments right now, because this one deserves to be remembered by name. Number 18 is a breakfast that never had a fancy name and never needed one. It was simply called tomato juice on the menu, but what it really meant was this: a small glass of thick, room-temperature tomato juice, slightly seasoned, served with a twin-pack sleeve of saltine crackers and sometimes a wedge of lemon on the rim. This was the standard breakfast appetizer at diners across the Northeast and Midwest in the early 1960s. Before your eggs arrived, before the toast was done, the waitress would set down that little glass without being asked. It was included. It was assumed. The tomato juice was usually from a can, poured first thing in the morning and kept at room temperature because nobody had yet decided that tomato juice needed to be cold. You'd crack the saltines over the top sometimes. You'd eat them alongside it. You'd tip the last quarter-inch of juice to get the thick part at the bottom. It sounds so small, so barely a thing. But it was a ritual, and rituals are the first casualty when a culture stops paying attention to its own mornings. At number 17, we find a dish that existed in a very specific geography of American diner culture and has vanished almost completely outside of it. Scrapple. For anyone who grew up in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, or southern New Jersey, scrapple needs no introduction, and something in your body just moved. For everyone else, it is a firm loaf made from pork scraps, head meat, liver, cornmeal, and spices, pressed into a tureen and then sliced and fried until the outside develops a thin, crackling crust, while the inside stays soft and deeply savory. The flavor is unlike anything else in the American breakfast canon: meaty, porky, faintly earthy, with a background warmth from herbs that changes slightly from one recipe to the next. In the mid-Atlantic states, the 1960s diner always had scrapple on the menu alongside eggs. It was served with maple syrup drizzled over the top, which sounds absurd and tastes perfect. Places like the Liberty Bell Diner or Helen's Family Restaurant in Pennsylvania Dutch country served it by the pound. If you're from that region, you haven't forgotten it, but most of America has. And that asymmetry, the way a food can be everything to one group and invisible to another, is part of what makes this list feel the way it does. Number 16. And we're moving into territory now that will feel very specifically like memory to a certain kind of person. The soft-boiled egg in a cup. This was a breakfast item that required a piece of equipment almost no diner has anymore: the egg cup. A small ceramic or metal cup shaped to hold a single egg upright, while you cracked it open with a spoon, peeled away the top, and ate the white and yolk directly from the shell with a tiny spoon. It sounds European, and it was in origin. But by the 1960s, it had become thoroughly American, particularly at diners catering to an older clientele or a more old-fashioned sensibility. The egg arrived in its cup on a small plate with 2 strips of toast, already cut into soldiers. Thin rectangles made for dipping into the runny yolk. If your mother came from the old country, or if your father had European blood in him, you probably had this at home. And if the diner on your corner served it, you ordered it there too without a second thought. It required patience and a little ceremony. It required you to slow down and attend to the thing in front of you. And somewhere along the way, America decided it didn't have time for that anymore. We're at number 15 now, and this one goes to the simple, overlooked beauty of creamed eggs on toast. Not scrambled eggs, not fried eggs, creamed eggs. Hard-boiled eggs, chopped roughly and folded into a thick, buttery white sauce, seasoned with salt, white pepper, and sometimes a little celery salt. Then spooned over 2 slices of white toast that immediately began to absorb the sauce from below, softening and swelling and becoming something entirely different from what they started as. This was a Sunday morning staple in many American homes in the 1940s and 1950s, and diners kept serving it well into the 1960s because their older regulars ordered it faithfully. It was gentle food, soft and warm and unchallenging. The kind of breakfast that worked when you weren't entirely awake yet, when the body needed fuel, but the spirit needed comfort. The sauce was always the same. The diner cook, sometimes a woman who had been making this since before the war, made it the way her mother made it. And then one day, it simply stopped appearing on menus. Not with a bang, just with a quiet absence, which is the way most things we love too late tend to go. At number 14, something that sounds so obvious you might wonder why it's on this list at all. The egg sandwich on rye. But here's the thing, it's not the egg sandwich you know. This was a specific construction. 2 fried eggs on thick sliced Jewish rye bread with caraway seeds, spread with nothing but butter. The eggs cooked hard-edged in a generous amount of butter on the flat top. The bread toasted in the same heat. And so it picked up color and a little of that egg butter flavor. No cheese, no hot sauce, no avocado, nothing that came after, just eggs, butter, rye bread, and salt. Wrapped in waxed paper if you were taking it to go. Held together with a single toothpick at the counter if you were staying. In the early 1960s, a good New York or Chicago diner would sell dozens of these before 9 in the morning. It cost 35 cents. The rye bread had a chew that white bread could never replicate, a density and sourness that made the eggs taste more like themselves. People who grew up on this combination still miss it in a way that's hard to articulate because it isn't just about the taste. It's about the speed of it, the simplicity, the way it could be assembled in under 3 minutes and still feel like somebody cared enough to make it. Number 13 brings us to a Southern breakfast tradition that never traveled far enough north to get proper recognition. Hominy grits with red-eye gravy. Grits, whole hominy corn ground coarse and slow cooked in water and butter until they reached a consistency somewhere between porridge and polenta, were served across the South as a matter of course at every diner that called itself a din. But the red-eye gravy is the part that's truly gone. Made from the drippings of fried country ham, deglazed with a cup of strong black coffee, hence the name, because when you added the coffee to the hot pan, the fat would separate in a ring that looked like a red eye staring up at you. It double. As thin, intensely salty, faintly bitter from the coffee, and completely unlike any other gravy in the American culinary vocabulary. You poured it over the grits and over the ham itself, and you ate it with a biscuit on the side. A diner in Georgia, or Tennessee, or the Carolinas served this every morning for about 40 cents. It required real country ham. And now that real country ham is hard to find and diners from that region have largely closed, this particular combination exists mostly in the mouths of people who are getting older every day. Coming in at number 12, we find a breakfast that almost no one under 60 will have ever tasted. Fried salt pork and eggs. Salt pork, essentially a cured slab of belly fat with a streak of meat through it, packed in enough salt to keep it through a New England winter, was rinsed, sliced, and fried in its own rendered fat until it went deeply golden and translucent, neither quite bacon nor quite lard, but something in between, something older. The eggs went in right after, cooking in the leftover drippings. If you've never had eggs fried in salt pork fat, you have genuinely missed something that I cannot adequately describe. The flavor is richer than bacon fat, salty, with a porky depth that seems to come from somewhere before most people's food memories start. This was New England diner food, French-Canadian diner food, The kind of breakfast served at places like Gagnon's lunch counter in Vermont, or the little unnamed spots along the Maine coast where fishermen came in before dawn and sat without, talking and ate and went back out. It was cheap. It was filling. And it tasted like a time before diners had names, before everything had a name, before someone had to brand the morning, before you could trust it. We're number 11, and I want you to sit with this one for a moment before we move on. Fried apples and pork sausage. Not applesauce. Not apple slices as a garnish on a plate where something else is the point. Actual apples, Cortland or wine sap or whatever was in season or available in the cellar, cored and sliced thick and put into the same pan where the pork sausage patties had just cooked, absorbing the fat, going slightly soft and caramelize. At the edges, just barely sweet, just barely tart, with that background warmth of pork behind every bite. Diners in Virginia, West Virginia, and Appalachian Kentucky serve this like it was the most natural thing in the world, because it was. The combination makes no apology for mixing sweet and savory. It didn't need to. These flavors had been put together for thousands of years by the Europeans who settled those mountain regions, and then by every generation that followed them. And the diner cooks of the early 1960s who made this were doing exactly what their grandmothers had done without once thinking about it. If someone in your family used to make this, if you can still see the pan on the stove, say something below. This one deserves a real conversation. Number 10, and we are entering the upper half of this list now, which means the emotional temperature has started to climb. The buckwheat waffle. Not a regular waffle made with buckwheat flour blended in. A full, committed buckwheat waffle, dark and dense and slightly crispy, made on a heavy cast iron waffle iron that a diner might have owned since the 1940s and never replaced because, say, it only got better with time. These waffles didn't rise as high as regular waffles. They didn't have the deep, perfect pockets that Belgian waffles would later make fashionable. What they had was flavor, a deep, nutty, almost chocolate-adjacent earthiness that was entirely their own, and a texture that was crisp where it needed to be and soft where it needed to be soft. Served with real butter that melted quickly in the heat and maple syrup that came in a small metal pitcher warmed on the flat top. Not pancake syrup, not corn syrup dyed amber, actual maple syrup from a farm that someone in Vermont knew by ball. These waffles were a Tuesday morning, an ordinary day made briefly extraordinary by the simple act of sitting in a place someone cared about and ordering something someone made with care. The waffle irons are gone now. The batter recipe has been forgotten. The breakfast remains only in memory, and only in the memories of people who are willing to say so out loud. At number 9, something is going to happen when I say this. Chocolate gravy over biscuits. If you are from Arkansas, Oklahoma, or certain parts of Missouri and Tennessee, you just made a sound. You did. Chocolate gravy, a thin, sweet sauce made from cocoa powder, flour, sugar, butter, and milk, cooked on the stovetop until it thickened just enough to coat a spoon. Poured warm over split buttermilk biscuits for breakfast. It sounds like dessert. It tastes like something your grandmother made on a special morning. The kind of morning that felt like a holiday, even though it wasn't. The kind of morning you measured time by for years afterward. Diners in the Ozarks served this alongside eggs and sausage. Some families had it every Sunday after church. Everything in it was cheap and pantry stable, the kind of food that emerges from scarcity and transcends it. The biscuit would go slightly soft where the gravy touched it and hold its structure everywhere else. And you ate it with a fork and then mopped the plate with whatever was left. If you had this as a child, you never forgot it. You couldn't. And if you've never had it, I am genuinely, sincerely sorry. You missed something that cannot be made up for. We reach number 8, and here the emotional register shifts, because this breakfast is about more than the food itself. The 2x4. Not every diner called it that. But the ones that had a name for it understood exactly what it meant. 2 eggs cooked to order, 4 strips of thick-cut bacon, 4 slices of white toast, a large glass of orange juice, and coffee with a refreshing ale that was already on its way before you finished the first cup. The full American diner breakfast, assembled with a kind of democratic confidence that this was the correct amount of food for a morning, that anyone who disagreed hadn't thought hard enough about what a morning actually required of you. It was listed on chalkboards as the house special or the morning plate, or sometimes just as the works. It cost about $1.25 in 1962. It came in under 4 minutes. The waitress remembered how you liked your eggs without being asked because you'd been coming in since before the current president was in office and you'd never once changed your order. This isn't just a forgotten breakfast. It's a forgotten relationship between a customer and a counter, between a neighborhood and its morning ritual, between people who knew each other in the way that only proximity and daily repetition can create. Number 7. Stewed tomatoes and eggs. Not shakshuka. That came later and came from somewhere else. This was an American farmhouse breakfast carried forward. Whole canned tomatoes, or fresh tomatoes in summer, simmered briefly in a pan with a little butter and sugar and salt until they broke down slightly and the liquid thickened. Then, 2 eggs dropped into the simmering liquid and allowed to cook in the steam until the whites set and the yolks stayed soft and gold. It was served directly from the pan onto a plate, with the tomato liquid acting as a loose, bright sauce. Some diner cooks added bacon grease instead of butter for a smokier note. Some added a pinch of cayenne that arrived quietly in the back of the throat a full beat after the first bite. The result was something vivid and alive, bright red and yellow on white, smelling of tomatoes and warmth. This was Depression-era food that carried forward into the post-war years on pure merit, the way the best ideas always do. It had fed families during hard times. By the 1960s, it had accumulated a kind of unspoken heritage in the households that still made it. And then, quietly, without announcement, it stopped being made. At number 6, we find a breakfast that sounds more like mid-afternoon indulgence and is all the more powerful for it. Warm fruit cobbler at the breakfast table. Yes, cobbler for breakfast. At certain diners, particularly in the South and rural Midwest, the kitchen would prepare a large cobbler the night before. Peaches, blackberries, or cherries, whatever was in season or available in cans. And in the morning, they would replant. Eat portions of it and serve them alongside eggs and meat as a matter of course. The cobbler crust, a loose biscuity topping that had spent the night absorbing the fruit juices below, would be warm and slightly sticky and completely irresistible. It sat on the plate next to your eggs like it had every right to be there because it did. This wasn't a quirk or an anomaly. It was a regional breakfast tradition rooted in the simple belief that sweet and savory belonged together in the morning. That fruit was as appropriate as toast, that last night's supper was this morning's hospitality. Nobody wrote it up in food magazines. Nobody called it a trend or put it on a menu with a fancy name. It was just breakfast. Until it wasn't. Number 5. And the list is narrowing now, closing in on something essential. The diner hash. Not corned beef hash from a can. Real hash made from what existed. Whatever was left from the previous day's cooking. Potatoes, onions, leftover roast beef, or pork, or chicken, a little pepper, a little salt, mixed together and pressed flat onto the griddle in a wide, thick cake, and cooked without disturb for 4 or 5 minutes until the bottom developed a crust. A real crust, dark and firm and caramelized, the kind of crust that makes a sound when the spatula goes under it. Then, flipped in sections and cooked again until both sides were right. A fried egg on top was optional. Most people ordered it that way. The hash was different every day because it was made from what existed on that particular morning in that particular kitchen, which meant it had a quality that nothing on the menu of a chain restaurant could ever replicate. It was unrepeatable. This hash, made today by this cook in this diner, would never exist again in exactly this form. And in that unrepeatability there lives something close to art, though nobody would have called it that. They would have just called it breakfast. At number 4, something that deserves more reverence than it has ever received. The diner coffee cake. Not a slice of something bought from a wholesale bakery and placed under a glass dome near the register. Real coffee cake, made in the diner kitchen, a simple, yeasted sweet dough, rolled out and topped with cinnamon, brown sugar, butter, and sometimes chopped walnuts, baked in sheet pans and sliced into generous warm squares that were ready when the doors opened at 5 in the morning. Served on a small plate with a fork and a cup of coffee refilled without being asked. Some diners made it with sour cream stirred into the dough. Some added a streusel so thick it crumbled onto the counter and you ate those stray pieces with your finger and felt no shame about it whatsoever. It cost a dime. Then 15 cents. By the mid-60s, maybe a quarter. And the women who made it, because it was almost always a woman coming in at 4 in the morning to have it ready by opening, knew exactly what they were doing. Knew exactly what they were doing. They were making the thing that made people come back. Not just for the coffee cake, for the feeling that somewhere in the world, something was being made for them specifically. That somebody got up early because you were going to be hungry. Number 3. The oyster stew breakfast. I know. But in coastal New England, in the fishing towns of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Maine, this was not unusual. Oysters shucked fresh, dropped into a pan with butter and whole milk heated gently together until the oysters just barely set at the edges and the liquid turned faintly ivory, seasoned with salt and white pepper and a touch of Worcestershire. Served in a wide bowl with oyster crackers on the side and a pat of butter placed on top of the stew where it would melt slowly as you carried the bowl from the counter to your seat. At a diner like Captain Joe's Lunch in a small harbor town, this was ordered by fishermen who had been up since 3 in the morning and needed something warm in the body that tasted like the water they worked on. Oysters in those years were not luxury food. They were working food, coastal food, the food of people who lived near the water and ate what the water gave them without ceremony. The stew arrived steaming in the cold morning air of a diner that hadn't quite warmed up yet. And if you were a child sitting beside your father when he ordered it, you thought it was the strangest breakfast in the world. And if he let you try a spoonful, you understood immediately. We arrive at number 2, and I want to be honest with you about why this one sits here so close to the top. The country ham breakfast. Not the pink, pre-cooked, honey-glazed city ham that appears on breakfast plates today as a matter of convenience. Real country ham, salt-cured and smoke-aged for months, sometimes an entire year, with a flavor so intense and salty and complex that it bore no more resemblance to regular ham than aged Parmesan bears to string cheese. A diner in Virginia or Tennessee or Kentucky that served real country ham, sliced thin, fried fast in a dry pan until the edges began to curl and caramelize, placed alongside red-eye gravy and biscuits and 2 over-easy eggs, was serving. Something that had taken the better part of a year to produce. The ham itself required salt curing, then smoking, then aging in a cool, dry space, then scrubbing the mold from the exterior before it could be sliced. It was an act of patience and craft and tradition that stretched back 200 years, rooted in the necessity of preserving food before refrigeration and elevated by generations of people who understood that time itself is an ingredient. The diner charged $1.50 for it, the most expensive breakfast on the menu, and people ordered it every single morning because they understood, even if they couldn't articulate it, that they were eating history. True country ham at a real diner is nearly impossible to find today. The people who cured it right have largely passed on, and with them went a particular excellence that no food magazine article has ever fully restored. And now, number 1, the breakfast that stands at the top of this list, not because it was the rarest or the most technically demanding, but because it was the most complete expression of what a diner breakfast meant in America in the 1960s. The Sunrise Special. Every diner had a version of it, and every version was slightly different, and that difference was the whole point. At the Bluebell Diner in a small Ohio town, the Sunrise Special was 3 eggs scrambled with diced onion and green pepper, a short stack of thin buttermilk pancakes, 2 strips of thick-cut bacon, 2 link sausages, a side of hash browns, soaked in bacon grease until they were nearly black on the outside and soft and steaming within, a small glass of orange juice squeezed by hand right there at the counter, white toast with butter and a little jar of homemade grape jelly, and coffee with unlimited refills. It cost $1.75 in 1963. It was never the same at 2 different diners. At Helen's in rural Pennsylvania, the Sunrise Special had biscuits instead of toast and sausage gravy on the side. At the Mountain View Diner in West Virginia, it came with a slice of fried tomato you didn't ask for and wouldn't have dreamed of sending back. At the Sea Breeze lunch counter in a New England harbor town, it arrived with a cup of fish chowder that simply appeared, wordlessly, as if the diner itself had decided you needed it. What made the Sunrise Special the #1 forgotten breakfast in America isn't the food itself. It's everything around the food. It's the fact that the waitress who brought it knew your name and your order and the name of your youngest child. It's the fact that the cook in the back had been behind that grill since 5:30 in the morning and would be there until 2 in the afternoon without complaint. Because this was the work and the work was the point. It's the fact that the man on the stool next to you was your neighbor, or your cousin, or someone you'd been seeing at this counter for 20 years without ever learning his last name, and somehow never needing to. It's the jukebox in the corner playing something slow and familiar. It's the smell of coffee and bacon and the particular sound of a diner in full swing, the bell above the kitchen window, the clatter of plates on Formica, the hiss of the flat top, the way someone's laugh bounces off the tile ceiling and makes the whole room feel warmer than it has any right to be. The Sunrise Special is gone not because the food was too complicated to make. It's gone because the world that made it possible, the America of small towns and neighborhood diners and people who had the time to sit at a counter and eat breakfast with their neighbors, that world has been replaced by something faster and louder and lonelier. And we didn't notice it happening until it was already done. We began this video with a question, not spoken out loud, but implied in the moment you clicked on it. What happened to that breakfast? What happened to the diner? What happened to the particular kind of morning that came with both of those things? And the honest answer is this: it didn't disappear all at once. It left in pieces. It left with every diner that closed because the highway bypass took the traffic away. It left with every cook who retired without passing on the recipe. It left with every Sunday morning that became a drive-through run instead of a sit-down ritual. It left with the people who remembered it, slowly, and then all at once, the way everything we love too late seems to go. If any one of these 25 forgotten breakfasts brought something back for you, a person, a morning, a smell, a counter you haven't thought about in years, I want you to say so in the comments. That's the whole point of doing this. Tell us about the diner. Tell us about the person who made the breakfast. Tell us what it smelled like, and what it cost, and whether they knew your name when you walked in. Because some memories are worth writing down, and this is as good a place as any to start. The coffee's getting cold, but that's all right. It was always better when it sat for a minute anyway.